Hello everybody, welcome back to Access Blockbusters and welcome to a quick non-spoiler reaction to episode 4 of season 2 of The Last of Us. This is going to be completely non-spoiler, so if you're worried about spoilers, if you haven't seen the episode, no worries, you can feel free to stick around. But if you're interested in a more in-depth discussion on the spoilers and all the details of The Last of Us season 2, episode 4, make sure to subscribe to the Access Blockbusters YouTube channel. Stick around, and later on this week we'll be doing our full spoiler discussion of The Last of Us Season 2, as well as Andor Season 2 and all the other great stuff that's going on in movies, TVs, and entertainment. So stick around for that. But before we do that, let's get into the non-spoiler reaction right now. So The Last of Us, right? And this is going to contain spoilers for the previous segments of The Last of Us. We can't really talk about this episode, even in non-spoilery detail, without talking about some of the details from the last few episodes. Joel's death really left a mark on the whole series, because it's now really about where do we go from here, right? And last episode began to set up some of the seeds of that. The last episode 3, was beginning to set up the idea of, okay, so now Ellie and Abby Ellie is on a parallel path to Abby, or she was at the beginning of this series. Now she's seeking revenge against Abby, and she's going out with Dina to find her in Seattle. And that's really, it's sort of a mirror image of the arc that Abby was on, that Ellie is now on. I think that makes a lot of sense. So that was really what I was expecting, because last episode we didn't see Abby, I don't think. And so it was more about Ellie and the aftermath of Joel's death and seeing that. And I think it was great. It was beautiful to see, and it was heart-wrenching and emotional and all that kind of good stuff. But, you know, it really helped set up the stage for what was going on, what was going to happen next. Because really the question is, after such an emotional gut punch and also killing off one of the main characters, right, from the series, you have to ask yourself, how do we continue to go on and carry the momentum of the series even without one of the main characters? And so last episode, I was just sort of trying to get my feet under me as I was watching the rest of the show. And this episode, I was expecting that conflict to continue of, okay, so now we have our direction set. Ellie and Dina are in Seattle. Let's figure out what happens now. Let's figure out how we're going to have that confrontation with Abby and see where we go from there. And I'm not going to lie, this episode was perhaps the least interesting, slowest episode, maybe of the entire series thus far, because the whole series is not afraid of its quiet moments. And that's not what I'm saying. I'm not saying that I don't want any emotional moments. I'm not saying I don't want any introspection or anything like that. That's not at all what I'm saying. This episode had a lot of that. And there is actually one really beautiful scene towards the beginning that at first I was like, what is going on here? And then as the scene unfolded, I was like, wow, it's bringing tears to my eyes, and it's barely even doing anything in terms of moving the story forward, but it was just such a beautiful scene. But the rest of the episode, and again, there are a couple great moments in there. There's another sort of action-y kind of sequence later on. And I'm not saying I'm not here for the emotional moments. I think that there are things being built up between characters and relationships and whatnot. But as I sat back and as the episode ended, I was like, what happened? What did we accomplish here? We accomplished a couple things. We learned a couple things about characters, and again, relationships began to develop and grow. But aside from that, I was a little taken aback at just how slow the episode was. I'm not saying this episode was filler. To me, filler is, and again, I like The Mandalorian, but I use The Mandalorian a lot in this sense. There are a couple episodes of Mandalorian where Mando, arrives on a planet and there's, they're like, before you get to the next part of your adventure, you need to do this part of the adventure. That's not what this episode was at all. It was not like side questing or anything like that. But I do think that they just slowed down the pace to such a degree that it was almost jarring, that by the end of the episode, I was like, oh, okay, so this feels like a really character episode. I feel like it got dragged out a little bit too long, that by the end of the episode, I was like, well, I still have the same questions I really did at the beginning of this episode. And I mean, I'm not going to lie, I'm not going to jump off the bandwagon of the show or anything, but I was a little disappointed by it. But again, I haven't lost faith in the show or anything like that. I just was a little surprised at this, especially given the fact that this is the halfway point of the series or the season thus far. So we'll see where we go from here, because, I think that I would have liked to have seen some momentum beginning to build towards the end of the show. And now I don't really know. I feel like the show has to restart itself and its momentum, but we'll see about that. Guys, what did you think about episode 4 of season 2 of The Last of Us? Again, make sure to subscribe to the Access Blockbusters YouTube channel if you are interested in the full spoiler discussion. That will do it from me for the Access Blockbusters YouTube channel, and I will see you guys in the next one.